Nick Majerison here. Welcome to Top Med Talk. And on today's Top Med Talk, we're continuing EBPOM 2018. Any answers? This is part 3, the big trials. This discussion covers most of the big trials that have been part of the perioperative calendar, including the FEDORA trial, the IMPRESS trial. Also, we get into the RELIEF trial, and we have a look at OPTIMISE II as well. It's presented by Mythen and Desiree Chappell, with contributions from Professor Paul Myles and Rupert Pearse. Oh, and if you missed this when we streamed it live on topmedtalk.com, there's a reason for that. Keep listening to the podcast, and right at the end, I'll tell you how you can be part of all of the live shows that we do here on Top Med Talk. Let's have a listen to the podcast.
Top Med Talk. So we're going to switch gear a little bit, staying on our big picture of fluid and hemodynamic management. We're going to go back to the big trials. So I think one of the biggest trials that's informed us this year, which we've done a number of times now, is the RELIEF trial. So Paul Myles from Melbourne, Australia, as the lead chief investigator, has been kind enough to give us 3 bites at this now, to turn around and say, tell us about it. And at EBPOM, he turned around and said, really, really push me now. Yeah. You know, he accepted online submission of questions. He said, I'm opening my kimono to you, if that translates. I'm not sure exactly how he expressed it, but you know what?
I don't think Paul said that exactly, but we can ask him later.
You know what I mean. So let's get Paul to remind us, Professor Paul Myles from Monash in Australia, to remind us as the results of the RELIEF trial.
Patients undergoing major abdominal surgery, a restrictive IV fluid regimen designed to achieve zero balance during surgery and out to 24 hours after surgery did not reduce serious complications or hospital length of stay, and it did not improve disability-free survival. However, that restrictive regimen was associated with a higher risk of acute kidney injury and other serious complications. And if you're using any sort of fluid responsiveness monitor, a goal-directed device, the effects do not change. If you are a high-functioning ERAS hospital or not, the results do not change. They apply equally in both settings.
Now, the way that Paul says that, which is completely accurate, can be confusing for some people. So I know that some people, because we've had grand rounds, lucky enough to have Paul Myles over on sabbatical, grand rounds about this, and people are still saying, oh, hang on a second, are you telling me that the monitoring, the goal-directed therapy doesn't work and enhanced recovery doesn't work? So you've listened a number of times to the presentation. What do you think he's telling us?
Well, I've listened to enough of the post conversation and dive. I mean, I don't know, Monty. Do you think people are going to hear this and say this is just one more thing that one more study in my pocket to say that I don't have to do this? I don't have to do ERS. I don't have to use these monitors.
That's not what he's saying, is he? He says he thinks that enhanced recovery is important and it works, and he has a view on more advanced hemodynamic monitoring, which we'll come back to. Yeah. But what he's saying, I think, is if you're in a fully implemented enhanced recovery program and you run the patient at zero balance or drier, it's not going to, being an enhanced recovery program is not going to protect them from having a greater chance of developing acute kidney injury or other complications. Right. Check?
Yep.
Check. If the same thing applies and somebody happens to have applied a hemodynamic monitor, which is distinct from active algorithm-driven fluid hemodynamic management, having the monitor on or around is also not going to protect you. Yeah. I think that's what he got. Now, on the... We're clear on that, no, I think. We've tortured poor Paul.
We have.
Okay. And we'll get more on that in a second, another clip. But the other recurring thing, this came up a lot. This is the questions that went to the top of the online voting system. One is the so-called AKI just a transient post-operative creatinine bump? And I think he made it clear that they didn't just look at the minor creatinine bumps. Right. These were doublings or more of creatinines and the use of statistically significantly more use of hemofiltration in these patients. So no one's doubting that one. But then the other big question is, if it didn't have an impact on disability-free 1-year survival, does the AKI that was seen and the infections really matter?
Right.
Have you heard that mentioned by people as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's always the question, and they just say it's transient and it's not long-term effects. Even if it is transient, long-term, it's not going to cause any problems. When you hear that.
Yeah. So, I mean, what would be a hunch is if you developed a serious creatinine rise post-operatively, how long do you think it would take for that to come to fruition? Years.
Yeah.
I mean, we looked out, Ramani Munisinger published, we looked out 10 years.
10 years?
It was 10 years in total. And some other people have done 5 to 10 year follow-ups.
Uh-huh.
Let's call them scars of major complications. It takes years and possibly decades to see the consequences of that. So let's have a listen to what Paul said he has planned in the follow-up about AKI.
Now, I guess one thing that's struck us, and Ronaldo Bellomo, who's an expert on critical care and kidney injury in critical care, and certainly myself and others on the team who kind of fascinated by this whole concept, is what is perioperative or post-operative AKIs telling us as anaesthetists? We've got a fair idea of what's telling critical care physicians. There is strong correlation between higher rates of AKI and terrible outcome following critical care. But what is it like in the perioperative setting? Is it an increased creatinine really of any importance, or is it just a surrogate marker of something that the patient themselves won't personally experience and may actually just be a transient thing that all comes good? Now, there's a lot of data that would suggest that's simply not the case, that in fact it is a serious signal of longer-term kidney damage. In other words, you get not just transient kidney injury, but you get permanent nephron loss. And it's correlated with chronic kidney disease. Now, that at this point is a hypothesis. And we are going to look at our data set now and go back to NHMRC, ask for another $1 million, which they'll happily give us, and we're going to follow up all 3,000 patients out to beyond 3 years after their surgery, and we will have that longer-term data that I think we all need to perhaps better inform the full meaning of the RELIEF trial.
So, certainly those experts are convinced that it's not just a transient bump and should be taken seriously. And well done, that's what we all want to see, is those really meaningful, long-term follow-ups. Now, part of Paul's conclusion for a simple takeaway message as opposed to zero balance is his
rule of three.
His rule of three. What did you take from his rule of three?
Practically speaking, I think that if you don't have any extra tools at your disposal, that, 3-hour surgery, you have 3 liters intraoperatively and 3 liters postoperatively within the next 24 hours.
Adjusted according to obvious losses, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
So Rupert Pearse is in the audience.
Yeah.
And I picked, I suppose, the right word.
You were beating up on poor Rupert.
And Professor Rupert Pearse, who's the chief investigator for OPTIMISE II, along with some other wonderful trials. And we talked very honestly last week on the first podcast about Pearse's folly and why these trials are important. So I thought, here's an opportunity to, and I believe Rupert's doing exactly the right thing.
He is.
To expose Rupert to the question in front of Paul Myles about whether he should just give it up.
It was great.
Here we go.
Sure.
And I think Paul actually came to his rescue.
He did.
Rupert, the observations about cardiac output monitoring and it's just down to giving everyone 3. You seem to be doing a very, very large, expensive trial. Why don't you just give it up?
Ask very provocative questions. I think it's very helpful. I think what Monty's referring to is the OPTIMISE II trial being led by Rupert Pearse, which is effectively, I won't explain the details of the trial, but it is to sort of enhance effectively cardiac output and therefore hopefully organ blood flow in the perioperative period. And we are contributing or participating in OPTIMISE II at our hospital in Australia, as are quite a few in Australia and certainly around the world. My very strong view is that is a crucially important question in perioperative medicine, and I think even after RELIEF, the importance actually is even greater still. It's actually a different sort of question, but it will really, I think, help put another big piece in the puzzle of optimal perioperative care.
Thanks, Paul. While I gather my thoughts, I think the first thing is that the philosophy of OPTIMISE probably pitches very close to where you are with your Liberal group in Relief anyway. That is, but it's a treatment algorithm. It's not a cardiac output monitor. There is a cardiac output monitor in that algorithm, and in the same way, Relief tested two different algorithms, and that's what we're doing in OPTIMISE II is we're comparing usual care, whatever people usually do, to a treatment algorithm, and that treatment algorithm has a monitor in it. But if I understood correctly, you didn't make any mandated requirements on what people did with a cardiac output monitor, and that's probably quite a key difference. The other thing that I think is really, really fascinating about Relief and OPTIMISE II is the first OPTIMISE trial, the big treatment effect was in infection. That's where all the treatment potential non-significant benefit existed, and OPTIMISE II has been powered specifically to see whether we can improve rates of surgical site infection and so on.
So there's a recurring theme.
Yeah.
The outcome variables that can be affected, being infection, pneumonia, acute kidney injury. Yeah. We'll come back to that. So if folks listening want to hear all of these lectures, just to be reminded, we'll put up podcasts to join our current library of close to 200 podcasts up on the Top Med Talk website, and if you look into the various articles, you'll find links to papers that have been talked about. So you'll get the full lectures on the Top Med Talk website. There's a great search engine. So if you hear us talking about trials like Relief, for example, you can type Relief in, and you'll get a series of discussive articles about that and the results presented. And likewise, for example, Balanced versus Saline. Blood pressure, in press, hypotension, they all work. Now I'm going to touch on FEDORA just very, very briefly, which is one of the most recent multi-centre goal-directed hemodynamic therapy trials. And I gave a lunchtime lecture on that on the first day to a large, very engaged audience. And I tried to pull together those three recent trials that we went over in some detail last week and have also done in some detail in various different podcasts. And that was the INPRESS trial, which is the INPRESS, I-N. It's impressive, but it's also INPRESS, which is a multi-centre trial of blood pressure management, FEDORA, which I've just alluded to, and Relief, and how to try and bring them all together. And then I made a slightly naughty, as it's called, conclusion. Here we go. So how do I put those three papers together? Well, the world's changing the whole time. It's great. New big trials coming along. OPTIMISE II is coming, FLOELA is coming. I think there are other big trials going on around the world. There are quality initiative endeavours. The FUTIER trial, top left, I think we all agree we should continue to take blood pressure seriously, but probably should pay it a little bit more attention than maybe some of us have been doing for a few years. And I think there'll be a growing interest in whether or not one can safely use peripheral norepinephrine infusions in patients who are at greater risk to keep that blood pressure up. And I think there's large trials need to be done to try and determine the safety-risk balance there. FEDORA, I just think, reinforces what we've known from the meta-analysis forever, not forever, for the last 20 years, forever in EBPOM anyway. And OPTIMISE II may or may not give us a definitive answer to that. OPTIMISE II has a different algorithm, it has a different technology, it has different interventions, it has different endpoints. It's a very good, important, large trial, but it's not exactly the same. And then there's Relief, and I'd say hopefully with Relief, you at least know that running patients on the drier side, which would include zero balance, is probably not in their best interest. And that rule of three is a great start. Why do I think the question is still alive? This is a little bit naughty, because it's naughty. This is putting on a single graph the AKI rates from Relief and the AKI rates from the FEDORA trial, which is the goal-directed hemodynamic therapy trial. So when you look on this side, you've got the restrictive group from Relief and you've got the control group from FEDORA. Remarkably similar rates of acute kidney injury of about 8.5%. If you then look to the other side, you've got the moderately liberal group from Relief and the AKI rates are down to 5%. If you look at the goal-directed one, the AKI rates are down under 2%. And when you look at the meta-analysis of the active hemodynamic trials, they're closer to that 1 to 2% than they are to the 5%. It's a little bit naughty, as I said, it's very naughty, because you shouldn't really be comparing trials in this way, but that's why I think this question, as we all do, remains alive, because it may be
that the more proactive management of hemodynamics produces even better results than careful, meticulous fluid management, which would appear to be rare in its own right, and choosing to be moderately liberal compared to restrictive.
So there it was. I was a little bit naughty.
So you got to mess with Rupert, but are you going to try and drive Paul Myles crazy too?
so a little bit naughty, and to a certain extent a little bit provocative to Paul. But to be fair, he rose to that.
He did,
and we'll go over that in a second. So for those who didn't completely track on that, I'll put the slide with the papers and the papers links in the link on the website www.topmedtalk.com. I'll also put the slide in there that I drew up, which when you cross-compare studies, that can inform questions is the important thing. And Paul Myles picked up on that. I asked him to comment on it because it's a legitimate thing to do, providing you handle the conclusions correctly.
First of all, I think your final conclusion is with your naughty selected meta-analysis.
We're not supposed to do that, are we?
It wasn't naughty to overlap the data and make the point you made. It would be naughty to, and you didn't do this, would be to conclude, here's the evidence to show that the goal-directed is right.
Yeah.
That's the question that's well supported by the existing data and will largely be addressed by OPTIMISE II. And it's one of the reasons why that trial is so important, because if it is true, then it's really clinically important for all of us, because it means we can truly make a difference in further improving outcome by using, whether it's a device or a regimen, that can actually, fine-tune and optimise that, pardon the pun, optimise the patient for the best possible recovery they can have. And that is really why we're all here, I think.
So there we go. I think we're all on the same page with all of that. I'm on the naughty step.
Time out, Monty.
I think I was just let off it. I think hopefully I could... okay.
Oh, no.
That's dealt with that one. I've just been so much looking forward to using that.
I know you've been waiting for that, haven't you?
Top Med Talk.
The final part of the programme will be on the way soon on the Top Med Talk feed. Now, I mentioned before, if you missed that show when it was streamed live on topmedtalk.com, that's likely because you haven't signed up for our email alerts yet. Get onto the website, topmedtalk.com, and sign up as soon as you can. There are more details on the show notes for this podcast. Don't forget, of course, you can meet the Top Med Talk team. All you need to do is turn up to one of our events. EBPOM.org/meetings is the place where you can find out details of that. That's EBPOM.org/meetings. Our next big event is between the 28th and the 30th of September in Chicago. That's EBPOM USA, the Chicago Masters Course, Perioperative Care Practicum. Between the 28th and the 30th of September, EBPOM.org for more details. That's